This is really important because I feel sorry for the woman. It's very sad that she died. I'm not in any way happy that she died. She was in that position, one, because her lesbian partner said, "Drive, baby, drive, drive." The lesbian partner then said, "It's my fault. I told
Why
her
is
to
it
be out
relevant
here."
that she's a lesbian?
Hold on
Michael?
one second.
Why is that relevant?
Because she's the partner.
You interrupted me. Down interrupt Kyle. Why is it relevant that she's a
One
lesbian?
second, Kyle. I'm just trying to have a conversation.
I would say it's irrelevant that she's a lesbian.
Hello guys, welcome back to the channel. So Piers Morgan put a panel together to talk about what happened in Minnesota, and these three barely agree on anything. Coleman Hughes is there, Kulinski is there, and so is Michael Knowles. This one's from about 6 months back, and nothing about it has settled down since. The fight is over a woman named Renee Good, who died after an encounter with immigration officers. Some people called what she did domestic terrorism. Others say the officer is the one who should be answering for it. The panel spends the whole segment trying to figure out which of those is closer to true, and they don't get there quietly. If the names are new to you, Coleman Hughes is a writer who usually lands somewhere in the middle, Kulinski runs a progressive show, and Michael Knowles is a conservative commentator. Three very different people, same footage, completely different readings of it. Stay with this one to the end, because somebody says a word he can't defend, and the room turns on him for it. Before you start, one question. Do you think people should be allowed to film officers while they're working? Yes or no is fine. Just put it in the comments, and tell me where you're watching from while you're down there. I like seeing how far this stuff travels. All right, let's get into it.
I think we've covered this well. I do want to move, just before we run out of time, I want to move to Minnesota, and I want to start with you, Coleman, if I may. This has been another huge story in the last week, and it goes to domestic law. It's, I think, a complex story, again, that requires a nuanced view, and I'll lay mine out, Coleman, just for the record. I've watched this video a dozen times or more from every potential angle, and it is my belief that it is utterly ridiculous to categorize what this woman, Renee Good, was doing as domestic terrorism. I see somebody who got a little panicky as the ICE guys came towards her and decided to drive away, and that the ICE guy in front of her car, who coincidentally a few months earlier got dragged by a car for a sustained period of time and had injuries as a result, potentially affecting his judgment in a similar situation, I suspect will be a key part of this. He reacts in a equally panicky way and shoots her 3 times. And I don't see him as a cold-blooded murderer who did this deliberately as a way to murder somebody for the hell of it. I don't see her as a completely blameless part of this. I think she took decisions which led her down a path which I think were extremely unfortunate and, as it turned out, deadly for her. In other words, I think it's quite a complex story, which, if you freeze frame it right down to every grab we've seen, anyone who thinks they have an absolute certainty about what happened here, I think is lying. And I think they're just, again, moving to the tribal place. This has to be this because my side believe this, or it has to be this because my side believe that. Am I wrong?
I couldn't agree more, Piers. I want to separate 2 issues really quickly. I'll get to the tragic death of Renee Good, but first I want to separate the issue of how ICE officers are behaving in Minnesota in general, right? Right now, social media is being flooded with videos of ICE officers needlessly escalating situations, questioning U.S. citizens who legally do not have to answer any questions. Some ICE officers seem to be under the impression that you're not allowed to film them. You are allowed to film them. And even, the worst part of this is that the Trump administration, the Department of Homeland Security, seems to have indicated to ICE officers that filming them is the same as doxing them, which it's not, right? So there is obviously, I think there's probably tons of ICE officers not getting videoed that are doing their jobs responsibly. And it's a tough job and it's a dangerous job. And I respect that. But there's a lot of ICE officers that are just running roughshod over all of their responsibilities as officers. And they're being fanned on by the administration. I think that's really important to say up front, that that's a real phenomenon and needs to be talked about.
This is where it starts, and it starts with a word. Before the panel gets anywhere near the footage, the label is already sitting on the table, and the label is domestic terrorism. Piers Morgan said this: "It is my belief that it is utterly ridiculous to categorize what this woman Renee Good was doing as domestic terrorism. Now understand what you just heard. That is not someone on my side saying it. That is a guy who builds his whole show around telling you both teams are equally tribal, and even he will not touch that word. And here is what people do not realize about labels like that. They are not descriptions. They are permissions. Once you call a driver a terrorist, everything that happens afterward gets graded on a curve, and the woman who died starts the conversation already guilty. That word went out fast, it went out loud, and it went out before most people had seen a single frame." Then Piers said this: "Anyone who thinks they have an absolute certainty about what happened here, I think is lying. Fine. But watch how that uncertainty gets spent. It never lands on the person holding the badge in the form of caution. It lands on the woman who is not here to explain herself." And then Coleman Hughes does something I honestly did not expect. He steps back from this one case entirely and describes the pattern. Coleman said this: "Some ICE officers seem to be under the impression that you're not allowed to film them. You are allowed to film them. You are. Recording a public officer doing a public job in a public place is legal, and it is not close. What makes it worse is the claim that the department has been signaling to its own officers that filming them is the same as doxing. It is not the same. Doxing is publishing somebody's home address, their private number, their family's details to make them a target. Pointing a phone at a uniform in a parking lot is the opposite of that. It is the only receipt an ordinary person has." Coleman said this too: "There's a lot of ICE officers that are just running roughshod over all of their responsibilities as officers. Read that again. That is not a protester. That is not an activist. That is the most careful, most centrist voice at that table, saying the guardrails are gone."
Now, let's separate that from the issue of Renee Good, who was tragically killed by Jonathan Ross. Now, here, Piers, you're right to point out there are so many critiques of how this officer and his partner handled the situation. Why, officers are trained not to be in front of a car to begin with, right? That's one on a laundry list of ways in which this was terrible policing. However, a lot of prominent Democrats are saying that this is murder. Murder, that is a legal term with a legal standard. Now, if this goes to trial, it's likely to get removed to a federal court, which is going to be favorable for the officer. And what the jury is probably going to be instructed is, if this officer had reason to believe he could have suffered bodily harm, he or his partner could have suffered serious bodily harm, then by statute, he's authorized to use deadly force. The jury is going to be instructed if he felt he was in serious danger. Now, we get the benefit of seeing 5 different angles on the video in slow motion over and over and over again. Yeah. So we can come to the conclusion that, he was out of he was out of line of the car during those second and third shots. But he didn't have that advantage. He experienced that in real time, in the blur of real life. The whole interaction was less than 2 seconds, and he had one shot at it. Not only that, his partner had his hand through the window, which, as you said, is precisely the situation that had put him in the hospital 6 months prior. Yeah. It's going to be tough to convince a jury that he didn't have reason to believe he was in risk, or his partner, of serious bodily harm.
I think from a legal perspective, I think you're probably right. And I think a jury may well end up making that determination based on the application of the law. But Kyle, I talked about both sides taking sort of implacable, incendiary positions. You compared ICE agents to Nazis, described the officer as an ICE thug who murdered a woman on camera by shooting her in the face. I mean, you're determining there that what we have watched with our own eyes, because we got the benefit of seeing all the videos, is somebody making a deliberate calculation to murder that woman for no reason.
I think he did. And
Why would you do that?
Study the video closely. Well, I'll explain it to you. So first of all, these guys are all roided up freaks. Let's point that out, that these are like Proud Boys and white nationalists and the dregs of society who have now been given a gun and a badge.
Well, that's a ridiculous generalization. And again, I don't think that helps.
Right. Let me finish
talking. But that kind of generalization doesn't help your argument. It makes you sound equally deranged.
No. I don't care about convincing you guys with your cult of fake nuance. I care about speaking to the American people who saw with their eyes
God forbid we should have
happening.
nuance.
And now watch the move, because this is the part that blows my mind. Coleman said this: officers are trained not to be in front of a car to begin with. Then he said this: that's one on a laundry list of ways in which this was terrible policing. A laundry list, not one error, a list. So we agree. Everyone at that table agrees. The officer was standing exactly where his training says never to stand, in the situation his training says to avoid, and everything downstream flowed from that one choice. And then, one breath later, the same guy explains why none of it will matter. Coleman said this: if this goes to trial, it's likely to get removed to a federal court, which is going to be favorable for the officer. Let me break down what that actually means, because it sounds like paperwork and it is not. A federal officer can pull his case out of a state courtroom and into a federal one, away from the local jury, into a room that is far friendlier to him. Same fact, different room, different ending. And the standard inside that room is the part almost nobody explains. Back in 1985, the Supreme Court decided a case called Tennessee versus Garner, and it held that deadly force cannot be used against someone fleeing who is not a danger to anyone. Sounds like that settles it. Then in 1989, a case called Graham versus Connor added the rule that actually runs everything today. An officer's actions get judged from the point of view of a reasonable officer inside that moment, not from what we can all see afterward. Those two rulings are decades old, they are settled law, and together they are the reason so few of these cases end the way people expect. So here is my honest read. Bad policing and legal outcomes run on two separate tracks, and they almost never touch. And Coleman hands you the proof himself. He said this: his partner had his hand through the window, which, as you said, is precisely the situation that had put him in the hospital 6 months prior. Sit with that for 1 second. His own argument is that these two walked straight back into the exact scenario that had already put one of them in a hospital bed. That is not a defense of the decision. That is a description of how it was allowed to happen a second time. And I will say the uncomfortable thing, because some of you will not like it. Kyle Kulinski walks in with the hardest possible language, and it hands everybody at that table an exit. They stop arguing the footage and start arguing his tone. That is a trade, and it is a bad one.
Yeah, because it's fake nuance. That's the problem. You have J.D. Vance out there saying that this guy, it should have absolute immunity. Absolute immunity? So if you rape somebody, he should be able to get off? This is fucking ridiculous. Absolute immunity.
I don't agree.
Nor
do I think, Kyle, nor do I think that Renee Good was deliberately trying to run over this ICE officer. I just don't think that there's
and the guy was trying to kill her.
That she was trying to do that or to cause him bodily harm. I think it was quite clear from the wheel positioning that she was trying to drive away. And the guy was ignoring his training to stand in front of her, and he had a past incident which probably in the moment made him fear the same thing was going to happen.
Piers,
and he shot her.
we have to have one
if you
factual
watch closely,
Michael,
just one little bit to inject some
I
facts.
literally never even made the fucking point I was trying to make at the beginning.
Don't talk at the same time.
The wheels were aimed at the cop when she accelerated.
All right, Kyle, I'll come back to you.
No,
Kyle, I will come back to you. Let Michael just interject on this one point. Michael.
This is really important because I feel sorry for the woman. It's very sad that she died. I'm not in any way happy that she died. She was in that position, one, because her lesbian partner said, "Drive, baby, drive, drive." The lesbian partner then said, "It's my fault. I told
Why
her
is
to
it
be out
relevant
here."
that she's a lesbian?
Hold on 1 second.
Why is that relevant that she's a
Michael,
lesbian? You interrupt me. Now I'm interrupting. Why is it relevant that she's a lesbian?
1 second, Kyle. I'm just trying to have a conversation.
I would say it's irrelevant that she's a lesbian. Secondly, drive can be an entreaty to drive away, which is what I think she was doing. Thirdly, the demeanor of Renee Good in the final video that came out shows somebody pretty calm, certainly not confrontational, certainly doesn't look to me like somebody intent on mowing down an ICE officer. I think she just wanted to get out of there.
And then Michael Knowles opens his mouth and the whole thing falls apart in about 8 seconds. Michael said this: she was in that position, one, because her lesbian partner said, "Drive, baby, drive, stop, go back." Find the word in that sentence doing absolutely no work. Lesbian. It explains nothing. It changes nothing about a car, a road, a decision, or a training manual. It is not evidence. It is decoration. And the kind of decoration a person picked tells you exactly who he thinks is listening. Kyle Kulinski catches it instantly. Kyle said this: why is it relevant that she's a lesbian? And there is no answer. There is no answer because there is not one. Michael stalls, Piers jumps in, and the panel drops the word like it fell out of a pocket. Piers ends up conceding on air that it is irrelevant, but it was said twice before anyone flinched, and that is the part I want you to hold on to. Nobody reaches for a word like that twice by accident. You have to understand what that word is for. It is not there to explain what happened on that street. It is there to make the woman who died feel a little less familiar to the person watching at home, so the sympathy runs a few degrees cooler. That is the entire function. And once you can see that move, you cannot unsee it because it shows up every single time somebody needs a victim to be a stranger. And here is why this exchange is so satisfying to me. Michael was not outnumbered by my side in that room. He still lost it. Piers Morgan said this: "It was quite clear from the wheel positioning that she was trying to drive away and the guy was ignoring his training to stand in front of her." That is the host. That is the man who spent the first half of this segment lecturing everybody about nuance and tribalism. He looked at the same footage and the intent argument is just gone. She was leaving. He was standing where he was trained not to stand. Then Piers finishes it off. He said this: "I think she just wanted to get out of there." Look at how far that panel traveled. It opened with a word like terrorism hanging in the air. It closed with the host saying she was trying to leave. And notice nobody on my side argued them into that. The footage did it. They got there because there was nowhere else to go. Meanwhile, the vice president is out in public floating the idea that this officer should have absolute immunity. Absolute, not a review, not a process, not a courtroom, nothing. And I want to be precise about why that idea is so dangerous, because it is not really about one man in Minnesota. Immunity is not a prize you hand somebody after you have decided he was right. It is a decision made ahead of time that nobody will ever check him. And the second that becomes the standard, the training stops mattering, the laundry list stops mattering, and the footage turns into something people argue about on television instead of something anyone ever answers for. That is what this segment is actually about. Not one panel, not one ugly word. The gap between everybody at the table agreeing something was done badly and a single person being accountable for it. So what do you guys think of this? Leave your thoughts down in the comments. Please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.